Welcome to the Beyond the Basics guide for the Nikon D7200. This is a great camera that will capture amazing images as well as HD video. We hope you'll enjoy learning more about it with this instructional guide. This guide is meant to be a study tool to be used in connection with and not a replacement of your camera's owner's manual. You can watch it entirely in one sitting or by chapter. Feel free to navigate to any specific chapter you wish to view at any time during the video. Please note that this guide does not cover many of the more basic features and functions of the D7200, as those topics are discussed at length in our original guide. Rather, this guide will help you move forward with your knowledge of your camera to help you take the best pictures possible. Your D7200 has many buttons, dials, and features that are fully customizable. By customizing the functions of your camera, you'll be able to access your most frequently used settings and make your camera even more intuitive. Making changes to the functions of the customizable buttons is done in the camera's menu system, under the Custom Setting menu. Here, select Menu F, Controls. With this menu, you can select many different buttons and controls to customize to your liking. Let's take a look at each of these options now. The first customizable button is the OK button with three options, including Shooting Mode, Playback Mode, and Live View. In Shooting Mode, you can choose to have the OK button either select the center focus point, highlight the active focus point, or none, which will disable the button's function in the camera's shooting modes. You can also choose the function of the OK button in the camera's playback mode. First, you can choose Thumbnail On/Off, which will toggle the view between full frame and thumbnail playback. Next, you can choose View Histograms, which will display a histogram in both thumbnail and full frame playback when the OK button is held down. Next, there is Zoom On/Off. When this option is selected, pressing the OK button will allow you to toggle between thumbnail or full frame playback and playback zoom. You can choose the initial level of magnification that you'd like when the button is pressed. The last option for the OK button in the playback mode is Choose Slot and Folder, which will display the card slot folder dialog when the button is pressed, so you can quickly select the memory card and folder you'd like to playback images from. The last mode that you can customize the OK button is Live View. Here you can choose from three different options. First, you can choose to have the button select the center focus point, which will simply reset the focus point to the center position in Live View. Next, you can choose Zoom On/Off. With Zoom On/Off selected, pressing the OK button will display a magnified view of the live view scene, so you can check for good focus. The last option is None, which will disable the button's function in live view mode. The next button that can be customized is the Function button. You can customize the button itself as well as the way the button operates in conjunction with the command dials. First, let's look at the options for customizing the role played by the Function button. You can choose from almost 20 different options. First, you can choose Preview. When this option is selected, pressing and holding the Function button will allow you to preview the depth of field with your current aperture setting. The next option is FV Lock, which will allow you to press the Function button to lock the flash value for the built-in and compatible external flash units. If you select this option, you can press the Function button once to lock the flash output, and then press the button again to release the flash value lock. The next option is the AEAF Lock. When selected, the AEAF Lock setting will allow you to press and hold the Function button to lock the exposure and focus until the shutter button is pressed completely. AE Lock Only will allow you to press and hold the Function button to lock just the exposure setting. Next, there is AE Lock Hold. With this setting, the exposure will be locked when the Function button is pressed and will remain locked until the Function button is pressed again. The AF lock only option will set the function button to lock the focus while the button is held down. Next, there is the AF on setting. When AF on is selected, pressing and holding the function button will activate the camera's autofocus, just like pressing the shutter button halfway. The flash off option will allow you to press and hold the function button to temporarily disable the flash. The next option is bracketing burst. This is a useful option if you use the camera's bracketing feature often. Normally, with the D7200, you must have the camera set to one of the continuous drive modes if you want the camera to take pictures continuously while the shutter button is held down. With the bracketing burst option, you can take a continuous series of bracketed shots with the camera in the single frame or quiet release modes. You'll simply need to press and hold the function button while you're pressing the shutter button, and the camera will continuously take the specified number of bracketed shots. Next, there is plus NEF RAW. You can use this option if you're shooting in JPEG and you'd like to shoot just a few raw images. Simply press the function button, then take the picture as you normally would. After the picture has been taken, the camera will resume using the JPEG only setting. If you want to take a series of plus raw images, keep the shutter button pressed halfway between shots. The next three options, matrix metering, center weighted metering, and spot metering, will activate the respective metering mode while the function button is pressed. The next option is viewfinder grid display, which will allow you to press the function button to display a framing grid in the viewfinder. The next option for customizing the function button is viewfinder virtual horizon. With this option, you can view a virtual horizon display in the viewfinder, which will help you ensure that the camera is level. To return to the regular viewfinder display, simply press the function button again. The next option, My Menu, will allow you to press the function button to instantly access the camera's My Menu. The next option is Access Top Item in My Menu, which will allow you to instantly access the top item in the camera's My Menu. The next option for customizing the function button is Playback. When selected, the playback option will allow you to enter the camera's playback mode by pressing the function button. This is useful for times when it may be difficult to access the playback button with your left hand. The final option for customizing the function button is None. When this option is selected, pressing the function button will have no effect. Now let's talk about how to customize the function button for use in conjunction with the command dials. Again, we'll enter the Controls section of the Custom Setting menu and select Assign Function Button. Here, we'll select Press plus Command Dials. The first option is Choose Image Area, which will allow you to select either the DX or 1.3x image area by pressing and holding the function button while rotating one of the command dials. The next option is One-Step Speed Aperture. When this option is selected, pressing and holding the function button while rotating the command dials will allow you to adjust the exposure settings in one full step increments, regardless of the shutter speed and aperture increments that are currently selected. The next option is Choose Non-CPU Lens Number, which will allow you to select the lens number for a non-CPU lens. Next, there is Active Delighting. When this option is selected, pressing and holding the function button while rotating one of the command dials will allow you to instantly adjust the active delighting setting. Next, there is HDR, or High Dynamic Range. When selected, the HDR option will allow you to press and hold the function button while rotating the main command dial to choose the HDR mode. And you can press and hold the function button while rotating the sub-command dial to choose the HDR strength. Next, there is Exposure Delay Mode. When this option is selected, you can press the function button while rotating either of the command dials to choose the length of delay between the time the shutter button is pressed and the picture is taken. You can choose no delay, or you can choose 1, 2, or 3 seconds. The final option is None. When this option is selected, pressing the function button while rotating the command dials will have no effect. In addition to the function button, you can also customize the role of the preview button. Almost all of the options for the preview button are the same as the options that are available for customizing the function button. You can also customize the role of the AEL-AFL button. The options for the AEL-AFL button include AE-AF lock, AE lock only, AE lock hold, AF lock only, AF on, and FV lock. For the AEL-AFL button with command dials, the options include Choose Image Area and Choose Non-CPU Lens Number. Each of these options function in the same way as they do when they're used with the function button. The next controls that you can customize are the command dials. You select one of 4 different options. The first option is reverse rotation, which will allow you to reverse the direction that you rotate the command dials when you're making changes to the exposure compensation and shutter speed aperture settings. The next option for customizing the command dials is Change Main Sub. With this option, you can reverse the roles of the main and sub command dials for both exposure settings and autofocus. For exposure settings, if off is selected, the default settings of main command dial, shutter speed, and sub command dial, aperture will be used. If on is selected, the roles of the command dials will be reversed, and the main command dial will control the aperture, and the sub command dial will control the shutter speed. For the autofocus setting, when on is selected, the roles of the command dials in selecting the autofocus mode and the autofocus area mode will be reversed. The next option is aperture setting, which allows you to select how you'd like to be able to adjust the aperture setting. If sub-command dial is selected, the aperture can be selected only using the sub-command dial. If aperture ring is selected, you can select the aperture only with the aperture ring that is available on specific lenses. If your lens does not have an aperture ring, aperture will be adjusted with the sub-command dial regardless of the option that is selected. The next option for customizing the command dials is menus and playback. There are 3 options for this setting. You can select off, which will mean that the command dials will have no effect on accessing the menus and playback. If either of the other 2 options, on or on image review excluded, are selected, the command dials can be used to navigate through images and playback and to navigate the menu system. If you want to prevent the command dials from scrolling through images during image review, you want to select On Image Review Excluded. The final option for customizing the command dials is Sub-Dial Frame Advance, with options for 10 frames, 50 frames, and folder. With this option, you can rotate the sub-command dial in playback mode to quickly skip forward or backward 10 frames or 50 frames, or by folder. The next option to customize is Release Button to Use Dial. This option applies to all camera buttons that normally must be held down while the camera dial is rotated. With this option, you can select either yes or no. If you select yes, you can press and release the button, then rotate the main or sub command dial to make changes. If you select no, which is the default option, you'll need to press and hold the button while you're rotating the command dials to make adjustments. The next option that you can customize on the D7200 is Slot Empty Release Lock. With this option, you can choose what you would like the camera to do when there is no memory card inserted. If you choose Enable Release, you will be able to press the shutter button to release the shutter and take a picture, even if there is no memory card in the camera. If you select Release Lock, the camera will disable the shutter button if a memory card is not inserted in the camera. The next option that can be customized is Reverse Indicators. With this option, you can reverse the direction of the plus-minus exposure indicators in the control panel, viewfinder, and information display. The next option that can be customized is Movie Record button. With this option, you can choose a function for the Movie Record button during still photography. You can choose from white balance, ISO sensitivity, and choose image area. With each of these options, you'll simply need to press and hold the Movie Record button while rotating the command dials to make your selections. The next option for customizing your D7200 in still shooting modes is Assign MBD15 AEL-AFL button. This setting will allow you to select the function of the AEL-AFL button that is on the optional battery pack for this camera. Many of the options that you can choose are the same as the options that are available for the camera's function button. The next option for customizing your D7200 in still shooting modes is Assign Wireless Remote Function button. This setting will allow you to select the function of the function button that is on the optional wireless remote for this camera. You can choose from several of the same options that are available for the function button on the camera body. Although it's reasonably easy and efficient to use the camera's menu system to format the memory card, there's an even faster way to do this. Press and hold the Delete button and the Metering Mode button at the same time. You'll see a blinking Format, the number of shots remaining, and the card slot on the control panel and information display. To change the card that will be formatted, rotate the main command dial. Press both buttons a second time to confirm that you would like to format the card. Another handy feature is the ability to use the ISO and exposure compensation buttons to perform a two-button reset. This reset will restore the camera to factory default settings. Simply press and hold these two buttons at the same time for more than 2 seconds. The top LCD panel will blink. Bracketing is a technique that allows photographers to take several versions of the same photo, but with different settings. When exposure is bracketed using 3 images, one of the photos will be properly exposed, one will be slightly overexposed, and one will be slightly underexposed. Then you will have the ability to choose the best image of the 3, or use photo editing software to combine the 3 shots, giving the image a broad range of highlights and shadows that are all properly exposed. This technique is often called HDR, or High Dynamic Range. Professional photographers have used bracketing since the days of film to ensure good exposure on important shots. With digital cameras today, bracketing options are available not only for exposure, but for flash level, white balance, and active delighting. The first step to configure the camera for exposure bracketing is to select what type of bracketing you'd like from the menu system. To do this, navigate to the Custom Settings menu and choose E, Bracketing and Flash. Then select E6, Auto Bracketing Set. From here, you can choose from Auto Exposure and Flash, AE Only, Flash Only, White Balance, and Active Delighting. To bracket only the exposure settings, select AE Only. Now, press and hold the bracketing button while rotating the sub-command dial to select the bracketing increments, or the amount of variation you'd like to see in each of the shots. Variations are set in increments between 0.3 and 3. The larger the number, the more variation in exposure there will be. If you select a smaller increment like 0.3, the images will have less variation. After you've chosen the bracketing increment, you'll need to choose the number of shots. To do this, press and hold the bracketing button while rotating the main command dial. You can choose to have 0, 3, 5, -2, +2, -3, or +3 frames. If you choose to have 3 frames, one will be standard exposure, one will be underexposed, and one will be overexposed. If you choose to have 5 frames bracketed, one will be the standard exposure, one will be slightly underexposed, one will be more underexposed, One will be slightly overexposed, and one will be more overexposed. The other frame options for bracketing are plus and minus 2 and 3. If minus 2 is selected, 2 shots will be bracketed, with one being the standard exposure, and the other will be underexposed. If minus 3 is selected, one image will have the standard exposure, one will be slightly underexposed, and one will be more underexposed. If plus 2 is selected, again, 2 shots will be taken, but this time one will be standard and the other will be overexposed. And if plus 3 is selected, one will be the standard exposure, one will be slightly overexposed, and the other will be more overexposed. Now, all you need to do is take between 2 and 5 pictures, depending on the number of frames you have selected. As always, simply press the shutter button halfway to focus and the rest of the way to take the picture. Now that we've experimented with exposure bracketing, let's look at the flash level bracketing feature. Although using flash bracketing is very similar to exposure bracketing, there are a few settings that we'll need to adjust. First, you'll need to change the bracketing set from auto exposure only to flash only. Again, this is in the menu system under the Custom Settings menu, Bracketing and Flash, and Auto Bracketing Set. This time we'll choose Flash Only. Note that if you choose AE and Flash, you can bracket the exposure level combined with the flash level. The next thing you'll need to verify is the flash is set to TTL control. This setting is also located in the Custom Settings menu under Bracketing and Flash. Select Flash Control for built-in flash and choose TTL. With the TTL flash control, the flash output is automatically adjusted. The other 3 flash options, manual, repeating, and commander mode, will not produce accurate results when bracketing. Now, all that you'll need to do is set the number of frames to be bracketed as well as the increment that you'd like. Again, just press and hold the bracketing button while rotating the main and sub command dials. Rotating the main command dial selects the number of shots, and the sub command dial selects the increment. Now, you'll just need to take several pictures depending on the number of shots you have selected. As always, press the shutter button halfway to focus and the rest of the way to take the picture. Just like you can bracket the exposure and flash, you can also bracket the white balance. Doing this will allow greater control over the color of images, particularly in tricky lighting situations. To set the bracketing set to white balance, return to the Custom Settings menu, Bracketing and Flash, Auto Bracketing Set, and select White Balance Bracketing. You'll have the best results if an appropriate white balance setting has been selected or if a custom white balance has been taken. When white balance is bracketed, only one picture needs to be taken, and the camera will automatically generate the bracketed copies of the image. For white balance, there are several options for the number of frames to be bracketed. The first option is 3 frames. With this option, the first frame is the standard white balance. The second frame will have increased amber tones, and the last frame will have increased blue tones. The next option is A2 frames. With this option, the camera will record 2 images. The first will have the standard white balance setting, and the second will have increased amber tones. The last option for frames in white balance bracketing is blue 2 frames. Again, the camera will record 2 images, with the first being the standard white balance, and the second image will have increased blue tones. You can also set the increment for white balance bracketing by pressing and holding the bracketing button while rotating the sub-command dial. An increment of 1 will provide the least amount of variation, and 3 will provide the most variation. In addition to bracketing, exposure, flash, and white balance, the Nikon D7200 also allows you to bracket the active D-lighting. Active D-lighting is a feature on many Nikon DSLRs that improves the detail in shadow and highlight areas of your image. It's particularly useful in scenarios where important parts of the subject are shadowed. People outdoors in full sun, for example. It's important to note, however, that if the active delighting setting is too high, more noise will be visible in the shadow areas of the image. To set the bracketing set to active delighting, we'll return to the Custom Settings menu, Bracketing and Flash, Auto Bracketing Set, and we'll select ADL or Active Delighting Bracketing. The other thing that we'll need to look at in the menu system is the active delighting setting. That setting can easily be accessed by pressing the I button. Here, we'll select Active Delighting and Normal. You can choose to have up to 5 frames bracketed by pressing and holding the bracketing button while rotating the main command dial. If you choose 2 frames, the first shot will be taken with active delighting off, and the second shot will have the selected active delighting setting. If you choose 3, 4, or 5 frames, the first shot will have active delighting set to off, the second shot will be set at low, the third shot will be set at normal, the fourth shot will be set at high, and the fifth shot will be set at extra high. The D7200 has a feature for creating multiple exposures as well as a feature for interval timer photography. These features are great for creative and artistic shots as well as for when you'd like to document a specific series of events. In film and digital photography alike, a multiple exposure is created when the film or image sensor is exposed 2 or more times to 2 or more different images. The final image has the additional image or images superimposed over the first. This photography technique is useful for creative artistic effect and is most commonly used when photographing fireworks, lightning, or superimposing a bright moon in a daytime scene. Let's walk through how to set up your D7200 to shoot a multiple exposure image. Note that this function is available only in the P, S, A, and M modes. First, you'll want to enter the Photo Shooting menu and select Multiple Exposure. Here, you can make adjustments to each of the 3 menu items. First, there is the Multiple Exposure mode setting. You can choose from Off, On Single Photo, and On Series. If you'd like to record just one multiple exposure image, you'll want to select On Single Photo. If you select On Series, you can take consecutive multiple exposure images until you return to the multiple exposure mode menu and select Off. The next option in the multiple exposure menu is Number of Shots, where you can choose to have 2 or 3 images superimposed. The bottom menu item is Auto Gain option. The gain determines how much adjustment to exposure the camera makes for each shot. If you want to have the exact same exposure value for each shot, Auto Gain should be set to On. When the Auto Gain is set to On, the camera will use the exact same exposure value and automatically divide that exposure based on the number of shots. For instance, if the number of shots is set to 3, the exposure adjustment would be 1/3. Likewise, if the number of shots is 2, the exposure adjustment would be 1/2. This way, when the exposures are combined into one image, the total exposure will be the equivalent of 1 proper exposure. There are times when you want to set the auto exposure gain to off, if you're photographing subjects with a dark background, or if you want to manually control the exposure for each shot, the off setting would work well. The other time that you would want the auto gain set to off if you were using a technique called masking, where part of the lens is covered for the first shot and then the opposite part of the lens is covered for the second shot. For these types of multiple exposure images, you would want each shot to have a full proper exposure. Another feature of the D7200 is the interval timer. With this feature, you can set the camera to take photos at preset time intervals, which can be minutes or hours. Photographers use this feature for documentary, scientific work, as well as for artistic and creative purposes. The interval timer could be used for photographing anything from runners in a race to dramatic sunrise sunsets to creative self-portraits in studio. You'll probably get the best results using this function if the camera is on a tripod. To use this function on your camera, first make sure that you're not using the self-timer or remote release modes, and that the date and time have been accurately set on your camera. Then enter the photo shooting menu and select interval timer shooting. Under Start Options, you can choose to have the camera start shooting now or at a specific time. If now is chosen, the first shot will be taken about 3 seconds after the settings are completed. If you'd like shooting to begin at a specific time, highlight Choose Start Day and Start Time and use the multi-selector to select the date, hour, and minute that you'd like shooting to begin. Note that the time in the interval timer uses 24-hour notation. The next step in setting up the interval timer for shooting is choosing the interval, or the amount of time that you'd like to pass between shots. Press the right arrow on the multi-selector to set the interval. Now you can set the hours, minutes, and seconds. If you're anticipating slow shutter speeds, you want to make sure that you choose an interval or time that is longer than the slowest shutter speed you expect the camera to use. When you're finished, press the OK button to continue. Now, you'll need to choose the number of intervals as well as the number of shots you'd like the camera to take at each interval. Again, simply use the multi-selector to make your selections. The option on the left side of the screen is the number of intervals, or how many times you'd like the camera to take pictures. Once that has been set, you can choose the number of shots you'd like the camera to take at each interval. When you've entered values for both of these settings, press the OK button to continue. The next setting is exposure smoothing. When enabled, exposure smoothing will allow the camera to adjust the exposure to match the previous shot. Note that when the shooting mode is set to manual, ISO auto must be enabled for the exposure smoothing to function properly. Now you're ready to have the camera start taking pictures. Highlight Start and press OK. Note that while interval timer photography is in progress, you can freely play back and adjust menu settings, but the settings within the interval timer function cannot be changed while interval timer photography is in progress. There are two ways to pause interval timer photography. First, you can enter the interval timer menu and select Pause. The other way to pause interval timer shooting is to simply press the OK button. When you'd like shooting to resume, select Interval Timer Shooting from the shooting menu and select Restart. In addition to capturing impressive high-resolution still images, the Nikon D7200 can record full HD movies. Note that because the basic features of the camera's movie mode were covered in detail in QuickPro's original guide for the D7200, we'll primarily be looking at more in-depth features and functions of the movie mode. Let's first take a look at the options for customizing many of the camera's movie mode functions. The customizable features are found in the Custom Setting menu, Menu G, Movie. The first option is Assign Function button. Just as with still shooting, you can set the function button to serve a specific role in movie mode. The first option is Index Marking. With this option, you can press the function button to add an index marking at the current position. This can be especially helpful when you're playing back or editing your movie files. The next option is View Photo Shooting Info, which will display the shutter speed, aperture, and other settings when the function button is pressed. To return to the standard movie recording display, press the function button a second time. You can also choose AE/AF lock, AE lock only, AE lock hold, AF lock only, and AF on. Each of these options function in the same way as they do for the function button in still shooting. The next two options that you can customize for the camera's movie mode are the Preview button and the AEL/AFL button. All of these options for these buttons are the same as the options for the function button. The final button that can be customized for use in the camera's movie mode is the Shutter button. For this button, you can select one of two different options. First, you can select Take Photos. When this option is selected, pressing the shutter button completely during movie recording will end movie recording and take a 16:9 aspect ratio still photo. The other option, Record Movies, will allow you to press the shutter button halfway to enter the live view in movie mode. Then you can press the shutter button completely to start or end movie recording. With Nikon's wide array of lenses, flash units, and other accessories like multi-power battery packs and GPS accessories, you'll be able to take amazing photos and further build your photography skills. Please note that using some third-party accessories, particularly flash units and multi-power packs, may cause damage to your camera and will void your Nikon warranty. You'll want to check with your authorized Nikon dealer or service representative for more information about the use of third-party accessories. Nikon has produced many lenses and types of lenses since they began producing film SLR cameras. Since 1959, Nikon lenses have been produced using the F-mount, meaning that they will fit any Nikon body with the same style mount. However, there are a few things that are important to know and remember if you're considering using older style lenses on your Nikon D7200. First, lenses that were produced prior to 1979, pre-AI lenses, will cause serious damage to your camera's mirror, so do not try to attach one of these to your D7200 body. If you have questions about a lens, refer to your camera's owner's manual for a complete list of incompatible lenses and accessories. Most lenses produced after 1979, or AI lenses, can be safely attached to your camera body. But these are lenses that are non-CPU, meaning that they will not automatically have the ability to meter or communicate with the camera. They are also manual focus lenses. One of the benefits of the D7200 camera is that you can input lens data for these lenses through the camera's menu system. Doing this will enable many of the features that are available on CPU lenses, most importantly including the matrix metering option. Lenses that were produced after 1986 are considered to be CPU lenses and are generally fully compatible with the D7200 camera body. Most of them will autofocus and are capable of sharing important data with the camera body. A CPU lens can communicate with the camera body via these CPU contacts. These contacts will share a variety of information with the camera, including metering information as well as focusing distance. The lenses produced by Nikon today are CPU lenses and are identified as either a Type G or Type D lens. The G or D is shown on the lens barrel. The main difference between these two types of lenses is that the D lenses include an aperture ring like this, while the G lenses do not. Now that we've discussed a little about lens compatibility, let's discuss choosing a lens. With a wide variety of lenses in Nikon's current lineup, it can seem overwhelming to know what lens or lenses will help you with the type of photography you're doing. Let's talk a little about lenses and apertures. When shopping for a lens, you'll notice that all lenses have a maximum aperture, or f-stop. Smaller numbers like f1.4 and f2.8 are considered to be faster lenses because they allow a lot of light into the camera. If your lens has a range of apertures, note that the largest aperture can only be used at the widest focal length. This is how the aperture or aperture range is indicated on a lens barrel. The maximum aperture of the lens is important to keep in mind when you're shopping for a lens, especially if you're planning on doing photography in low light conditions, action or sports photography, or if you're looking to create photos with a very shallow depth of field. After the maximum aperture of the lens, the next thing that you'll need to consider is the focal length. Nikon lenses are available in a wide range of focal lengths, each with its own benefits and uses. The focal length on a lens is the first series of numbers on a lens barrel. and it's measured in millimeters. This lens, for instance, is a 24 to 120 millimeter lens, or the focal lengths range from 24 millimeters to 120 millimeters. Lenses that have a range of focal lengths, like this 24 to 120 millimeter lens, are zoom lenses. Zoom lenses have the ability to get closer or farther away from a subject without ever actually moving the camera. Lenses that have only one focal length, like this 50 millimeter 1.8 lens, are prime lenses. Prime lenses do not have zooming capability, but many professional photographers prefer them, particularly for portraits, because of the great clarity they offer. With this understanding of focal lengths in millimeters, we can discuss some of the different ranges of focal lengths as well as the lens categories that different focal lengths fall into. Lenses that are less than 50 millimeters are considered to be wide-angle lenses. So the 24 to 120 that we just talked about could fall into the wide-angle range because it goes down to 24 millimeters. Wide-angle lenses are great for landscape shots as well as situations where space is limited and you want to include as much of a scene as possible. Mid-range lenses have between 50 and 85 millimeters. This range of focal lengths is great for family snapshots, portraits, and vacations. The 24 to 120 lens also falls into the mid-range category. These lenses are often referred to as walk-around lenses because they're so versatile and can be used for a variety of subjects and shooting scenarios. Telephoto lenses are lenses with over 85 millimeters and are great for getting closer to your subject. Sports and wildlife photographers use telephoto lenses extensively to zoom in on the subject. Telephoto lenses are also great for getting amazing close-up shots of flowers or other small objects. If you're photographing very small objects and you want to have the ability to capture even the smallest details, you want to look into a dedicated close-up or micro lens. The focal lengths for dedicated close-up lenses range between about 60 millimeters and 200 millimeters. In addition to apertures and focal lengths, there is one more important feature that you should consider when you're shopping for a Nikon lens: vibration reduction, or VR. Vibration reduction will help you get sharp photos at slower shutter speeds. This feature is especially useful in low light conditions and can make the difference between a photo like this and a photo like this. Your D7200 has many fully customizable settings and options. As we've discussed in chapters 1 and 4, you can customize the camera's buttons and dials, but you can also customize a wide variety of other camera functions to fit your personal preference. Let's take a look at some of the custom settings menus now. The first custom setting menu is Menu A, Autofocus. The first two items in this menu are AFC and AFS priority selection. When you're shooting in the camera's AFC or AFS focus modes, you can choose what priority you'd like to be given to the focus of the image. For both of the focus modes, you can choose from release or focus. If release is selected, the camera will allow the picture to be taken regardless of whether focus has been achieved. If you choose focus, the camera will not allow the picture to be taken if it's not in focus. The next menu item in the Autofocus custom menu is Focus Tracking with Lock On. With this menu item, you can select how long the camera will wait to adjust the focus when the subject abruptly moves. This option prevents the camera from autofocusing on other objects passing through the frame when the camera is using focus tracking. You can select options from 1 short to 5 long. You can also select Off, which will immediately adjust the camera's focus when the focusing distance changes. Next, there is AF activation, which will allow you to choose whether or not you'd like to be able to press the shutter button halfway to autofocus. If you select AF on only, the camera will not autofocus when the shutter button is pressed halfway. The next option is Focus Point Illumination, with options for AF point illumination and manual focus mode. For AF point illumination, there are options for auto, on, and off. If Auto is selected, the active focus points in the viewfinder will be illuminated only when the subject is very dark. When On is selected, the active AF points will always be illuminated. And when Off is selected, the active AF points won't be illuminated at all. For manual focus mode, you can choose On or Off. If On is selected, the active focus point will be displayed in the viewfinder in manual focus mode. And if Off is selected, the focus point will be displayed only during focus point selection. Next, there is focus point wraparound. With this option, you can choose whether or not you'd like to be able to have the focus point selection wrap around from one side of the viewfinder to the other. If Wrap is selected, you'll be able to continue scrolling when you reach any edge of the viewfinder, and the focus point will activate at the opposite side, top or bottom. If no wrap is selected, scrolling will be disabled when you reach an edge of the frame. The next option is number of focus points, which allows you to choose whether you'd like to use all 51 or just 11 AF points. Next, there is store points by orientation. With this option, you can choose whether you'd like the camera to use separate focus points for portrait or landscape orientations. If you select yes, you'll be able to choose a focus point when the camera is at a landscape orientation and a different focus point when the camera is rotated 90 degrees. Next, there is built-in AF Assist Illuminator. If On is selected, the AF illuminator will light under poor lighting conditions to help the camera find focus. Note that you must use the AFS focus mode in conjunction with the Auto Area AF mode to make sure the center focus point is selected for the AF illuminator to work properly. If Off is selected, the AF illuminator will not light. Now let's take a look at the options in the next custom setting menu, B, Metering and Exposure. The first menu item is ISO sensitivity step value. This is where you can select the increment that is used when selecting the ISO. You can choose from 1/3 step and 1/2 step. If you choose 1/3 step, you'll have more ISO settings to choose from than you would for the half step option. The next option is EV steps for exposure control, which allows you to choose 1/3 or 1/2 step for the aperture, shutter speed, and auto bracketing exposure values. Again, choosing 1/3 step will provide more exposure values to choose from than 1/2 step. The next menu item is Easy Exposure Compensation. With this option, you can choose whether you'd like to be able to adjust exposure compensation using only the command dials or with the command dials in conjunction with the exposure compensation button. If On Auto Reset is selected, you'll be able to adjust the exposure compensation using the command dials without the exposure compensation button. With this option, the exposure value will be reset when the camera or exposure meters turn off. The On setting is the same as On Auto Reset, except that the exposure compensation will not be reset when the camera or exposure meters turn off. If Off is selected, the exposure compensation can be set only with the use of the exposure compensation button in conjunction with the main command dial. The next item in the Metering Exposure Custom Setting menu is Center Weighted Area. With this option, you can choose the diameter of the metering circle that is used when the camera uses center-weighted metering. You can choose from the default setting of 8 millimeters, or you can choose 6, 10, or 13 millimeters. You can also select average. If average is selected, the entire frame will be averaged to calculate the exposure. The next menu item is Fine-Tune Optimal Exposure. With this option, you can fine-tune the level of exposure compensation you'd like to automatically be applied to your images for each of the metering modes. Note that for most scenarios, using standard exposure compensation methods is preferred, and the Fine-Tune Optimal Exposure option should only be used in special scenarios. The next custom setting menu is C, Timers and AE Lock. The first item is Shutter Release Button AEL. With this option, you can choose whether or not you'd like to lock the exposure when the shutter button is pressed halfway. If on is selected, the exposure will be locked when the shutter button is pressed halfway. The next menu item is Standby Timer. This is where you can set how long you'd like the camera's exposure meters to remain active when the camera is not in use. You can choose from settings ranging from 4 seconds to 30 minutes, or you can select No Limit. Next, there is the Self-Timer setting. With this option, you can make adjustments to all of the self-timer settings, including the delay, or how long the camera waits to take the picture after the shutter button is pressed. The number of shots, you can choose to have the camera take between 1 and 9 shots, and the interval, where you can choose how long the camera should wait between the shots. The next item is Monitor Off Delay, where you can choose how long you'd like the monitor to stay on when the camera is not in use. You can set a specific length of time for playback, menus, information display, image review, and live view. The final menu item in the timer's AE Lock custom setting menu is Remote On Duration. When an optional remote is used, you can use this option to select the length of time to have the camera wait for communication with the remote control before canceling remote control mode. The next custom setting menu is D, Shooting and Display. The first menu item is Beep, which allows you to select the volume and pitch for the beep sound when the camera autofocuses or uses the self-timer. Next, there is Continuous Low Speed. This is where you can select the number of frames per second that you'd like the camera to record in continuous low speed shooting mode. You can choose from between 1 and 6 frames per second. Next, there is Maximum Continuous Release. In the continuous shooting release modes, the camera will continue taking pictures the entire time that the shutter button is held down completely. With this option, you can set the maximum number of shots that you'd like the camera to be able to take in a single burst. You can choose any number between 1 and 100. The next menu item is Exposure Delay Mode. There may be times when you're taking pictures with slow enough shutter speeds that pressing the shutter button to take the picture would result in a blurry image. With Exposure Delay Mode, you can set the camera to have a brief delay after the shutter button is pressed before the picture is actually taken. You can choose from 1, 2, or 3 seconds for the delay. Next, there is Flash Warning when enabled. Flash Warning will display a flash-ready indicator in the viewfinder when lighting conditions are poor and the flash is needed to ensure a good exposure. Next, there is the File Number Sequence option, which allows you to choose the way that the camera assigns the numbered file names to the images. If On is selected, the camera will consecutively number image files regardless of whether the memory card is formatted or a new memory card is inserted. If Off is selected, file numbering will begin at 0001 when a new memory card or folder is used, or when a new memory card is formatted. The Reset option will reset the file numbering for the On option. Next, there is the Viewfinder Grid Display option, which will allow you to turn a framing grid in the viewfinder on or off. The next option is Easy ISO. When Easy ISO is enabled, the ISO setting can be adjusted by simply rotating one of the command dials. Next, there is Information Display. With this menu item, you can make adjustments to the appearance of the information display. You can choose Auto, or you can choose Manual. In Manual, you can choose B, Dark on Light for black lettering, or W, Light on Dark for white lettering. The next item is LCD illumination. If On is selected, the control panel will be illuminated whenever the camera's exposure meters are active. If Off is selected, the control panel will be illuminated only when the power switch is rotated to the light bulb icon. Next, there is MBD15 battery type. With this menu item, you can select the type of batteries that you are using with the optional battery pack. This will ensure that the camera functions as it's intended. The last menu item in shooting and display is battery order. With this option, you can tell the camera which battery or batteries you'd like to use first when you're using an optional battery pack. The next custom setting menu is E, bracketing and flash. The first menu item is Flash Sync Speed, where you can choose the maximum shutter speed that can be used with the built-in or external flash unit. For the built-in flash, you can choose 1/250th of a second down to 1/60th of a second. If you're using a compatible Nikon external flash unit, you can set the shutter speed to as fast as 1/320th of a second using an Auto FP option. The next option is Flash Shutter Speed, where you can select the slowest shutter speed that can be used with the flash in the program auto or aperture priority shooting modes. Next, there is Flash Control for built-in flash. This option will allow you to choose from several different modes for the built-in flash, including the sophisticated TTL mode, where the flash output is adjusted automatically depending on the lighting conditions. Manual, where you can manually set the flash power output. Repeating, where the flash will fire repeatedly while the shutter is open, creating a strobe-like effect. You can use this mode to take creative images that have a multiple exposure feel. The last option is Commander mode, which will allow you to use the built-in flash as a master flash to wirelessly control one or more external Nikon speedlights. Next, there is exposure compensation for flash with two options. First, there is entire frame. When entire frame is selected, both the flash level and exposure compensation will be adjusted. The other option is background only. When background only is selected, the exposure compensation will be applied only to the background in the image. The next menu item is modeling flash. When enabled, this option will allow you to press and hold the preview button when a flash is being used to see the effects of the lighting on the subject. The flash will fire continuously while the preview button is held down. The next menu item is Auto Bracketing Set. This item is discussed in detail in Chapter 2 of this guide. The last menu item in the bracketing and flash custom setting menu is Bracketing Order. With this option, you can choose the order in which you'd like the camera to record bracketed shots. The first option, Meter Under Over, will record the first shot at the standard exposure, the second shot will be underexposed, and the last shot will be overexposed. The other option will begin with the underexposed shot, then the standard exposure, and then finally the overexposed shot. There are two other custom settings menu, F Controls and G Movie. The Controls menu items are discussed in detail in Chapter 1 of this guide, and the Movie menu items are discussed in detail in Chapter 4. Your Nikon D7200 is a sophisticated camera and will need some basic care and maintenance to keep it in good working condition. Here are some tips for storing your camera. First, when the camera will be stored for long periods of time, remove the battery and use the battery cover. Next, make sure that the storage location is cool and dry and does not get exposed to temperatures above 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Avoid storing the camera in areas with high humidity, near televisions, radios, or other equipment that produces strong electromagnetic fields. When you're using the camera regularly, you'll want to protect it from several environmental elements that could cause damage. The camera should stay dry, and contact with dust or sand should be avoided. You'll also want to avoid subjecting the camera to sudden changes in temperature. If the camera is cold and is suddenly brought into a warm environment, condensation or moisture can build up on the camera's internal components. Also, leaving the lens pointed at the sun will cause damage to the camera's image sensor. Finally, make sure that the camera is turned off before you remove the battery, memory card, change lenses, or attach any accessory to the accessory shoe. You'll want to consult your owner's manual for a complete list of care techniques and cautions. Let's talk a little now about ways to properly clean the camera without causing damage. To remove dust or lint from the camera body, a blower or brush is a good tool to have on hand. With either of these tools, you can also clean the lens, viewfinder, and mirror. To further clean the camera body, you can also use a soft, dry cloth. Do not use alcohol or any other harsh chemicals. If the camera has been used at a beach, you can dampen a cloth with distilled water to clean the camera body. After the blower tool has been used to remove any dust and lint, you can use a soft cloth with a small amount of lens cleaner to gently clean the lens, monitor, and the viewfinder. When you're using lens cleaning fluid, be sure to apply the fluid to the cloth and not to the camera or the lens directly. Your D7200 can be set to automatically clean the image sensor each time the camera is turned on or off. To do this, enter the camera's setup menu and select Clean Image Sensor. You can choose either Clean Now or Clean at Startup Shutdown. If you select Clean at Startup Shutdown, you'll need to also choose which option you'd like. You can choose Startup, Shutdown, or both. You can also choose to have the image sensor cleaning set to off. You can also clean the image sensor manually. Step-by-step instructions are available in your camera's owner's manual. When cleaning the image sensor, great care should be taken, as damage to the image sensor or low-pass filter can easily occur. QuickPro suggests that you contact a Nikon authorized service representative for assistance in cleaning the image sensor or other internal camera components. Nikon suggests that your camera be inspected every 1 to 2 years by the original retailer or a Nikon authorized service representative. Additionally, the camera should be serviced every 3 to 5 years by authorized Nikon service personnel. We hope you've enjoyed learning more about your Nikon D7200. We know this new information will give you enough confidence and know-how to take your photography skills to new levels. Remember, you can refer back to any section of this guide at any time. Watch for more QuickPro guides on using newly released cameras. Thanks for watching.